"I'm not pretty," she whispered. The cowboy replied, "That's fine. I need honest, not fancy." Montana Territory, winter of 1887. The wind came howling down from the Bitterroot Range like a living thing, sharp, cold, and merciless. It tore through the pines and swept across the frozen clearing where a lone figure swung an axe again and again against a stubborn log. Each strike echoed through the valley, swallowed by the snowstorm building over the ridgeline. Eliza Warren paused to wipe the sweat from her brow, though the air stung with frost. Her gloves were frayed, her skirt hem stiff with ice, and her breath puffed white in the air. She looked nothing like the women who posed in church photographs or danced in town socials. Her hair was a wild mess beneath a faded scarf, and her shoulders bore the mark of hard labor. Yet she stood there, strong, stubborn, alive, building something the world said she couldn't. The cabin behind her was half done, its log walls crooked but standing. Smoke curled weakly from a stone chimney she'd laid herself. A mule tied nearby snorted restlessly, its ears twitching at the wind's rising cry. Eliza rested the axe blade in the snow and flexed her fingers, cracked and raw from work. Her supplies were running low, flour almost gone, lamp oil dwindling. She'd meant to ride into town before the snow came heavy, but pride had kept her here. Pride and something deeper, the need to prove she could make it alone. 3 months ago, she'd buried her older brother under a cottonwood tree near the river. Pneumonia had taken him fast. And when her fiancé back in Helena heard, he'd sent a short, cowardly letter, ending their engagement, saying, a woman on her own shouldn't expect a man to shoulder her misfortunes. She hadn't wept for him. Not once. But she had packed her few belongings and come north, chasing the land her brother had dreamed of claiming. It was all she had left of family. Now, as she looked around at the skeletal timbers and frozen ground, doubt whispered for the first time in weeks. "You can't finish this. You'll freeze here, Eliza." Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the axe again. She swung hard, but the handle slipped from her grasp, glancing off her palm and splitting the skin wide open. The pain was sharp, hot. She hissed through her teeth, clutching the wound, crimson spilling onto the snow. She sat heavily on a felled log, the ache in her hand throbbing with her heartbeat. The wind blew strands of hair across her face as she stared at the little cabin. Every log, every nail, it was a fight against loneliness, against the memory of all the voices that said she wasn't enough. She whispered into the wind, "I just want something that's mine." And for a moment there was only silence. Then, the sound of hooves. Her head snapped up. Down the ridge came a rider through the swirl of snow, tall in the saddle, coat flapping behind him, his horse's breath puffing in great white clouds. Whoever he was, he rode like a man who knew the land well. Eliza reached for her rifle leaning against the porch post. Her pulse jumped as the stranger drew nearer, slowing his horse when he saw her standing there, small but unflinching, rifle steady despite the shaking in her wounded hand. He stopped a few paces away, lifted a gloved hand in greeting. "Easy there, ma'am. Didn't mean to startle you." His voice was calm, deep, carrying that slow western drawl of a man used to long silences. Eliza didn't lower the rifle. "Trail's a long way from here. What brings you off it?" He smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed sharp. "Storm's rollin' in fast. Saw smoke through the trees, figured there might be a cabin. Name's Caleb Boone. Been driving cattle up through the range till the blizzard started threatening to bury the world." Eliza studied him, the weathered face beneath his hat, the quiet steadiness in his manner. Not young, not polished, but something about him felt reliable. Solid, like the kind of man who kept his word. After a pause she said, "You can tie your horse under the lean-to. There's coffee on the stove." He tipped his hat, gratitude flickering across his face. "Much obliged." Inside, the cabin was barely warmer than the outside. The roof leaked in places and the walls let the wind sing through the gaps. Caleb crouched near the fire pit, coaxing flame into life with a handful of kindling while Eliza wrapped her bleeding hand with torn muslin. "You built this yourself?" he asked after a while, eyes scanning the rough logs. "I did." He gave a low whistle. "That's something. Hard work for one person." Eliza's mouth tightened. "Hard work's all I've ever known." When the fire finally caught, it filled the space with soft orange light. The shadows danced across the unfinished walls, glinting off her bandaged hand. She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him, careful not to meet his eyes. "Why settle out here?" he asked. She hesitated, staring into the fire. "Because no one believed I could." He nodded slowly as if he understood far more than her words said. "People talk too much. But the land, it don't care what anyone thinks. It'll just test you till it knows what you're made of." Eliza allowed a faint smile. And what's it found in you, Mr. Boone? He took a sip of coffee before answering. A man who's tired of running from things that matter. For a long moment, only the crackle of the fire spoke between them. Outside, snow battered the roof, but inside, there was a fragile, flickering warmth neither wanted to admit they needed. Eliza's gaze lingered on him, the kind lines at the corners of his eyes, the steady patience in his movements. Then quietly, almost to herself, she whispered, "I'm not pretty, Mr. Boone." He looked at her, then really looked. His eyes held no surprise, no polite protest, just calm honesty. "That's fine," he said softly, setting down his cup. "I need honest, not fancy." The words hung in the air like something sacred. For the first time in a long time, Eliza felt seen, not for what she wasn't but for what she was. And as the storm howled outside her cabin, she knew this meeting was no accident. Fate had a strange way of sending company to those who'd learned to live without it. By nightfall, the storm had swallowed the world. Snow beat against the cabin walls like fists of wind, howling down the chimney in moaning drafts. Inside, the meager fire Caleb had coaxed to life flickered low, painting the rough log walls in shades of orange and gold. Eliza sat across from him, her wounded hand resting on her lap, a clean strip of muslin now wrapped around the palm. The sting had dulled to a steady throb. Caleb had done the bandaging himself, wordlessly, his touch gentle but firm. She watched him now, silently. He'd taken off his hat and coat, setting them near the hearth to dry. The man was all angles and quiet strength, jaw dark with stubble, eyes the color of storm clouds, and hands marked by years of work. His movements were deliberate, careful, like someone who never wasted energy on things that didn't matter. Eliza couldn't remember the last time she'd shared a room with another soul after dark. The silence between them wasn't the kind that gnawed, it was the kind that settled. Familiar, almost comforting. Caleb stirred the pot of beans she'd put on the fire earlier, the smell of salt and smoke filling the small space. "You've got grit, I'll give you that," he said, breaking the quiet. "Most men wouldn't take on a build like this alone." She gave a short laugh, dry as pine bark. "Most men would have quit before the roof went up. I almost did." "Why didn't you?" Eliza thought about it a moment. The snow hissed against the door like whispered ghosts. "Because I got tired of being told what I couldn't do." He nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. "That'll put steel in a person." When he handed her a tin plate of beans, their fingers brushed briefly. She felt warmth there that had nothing to do with the fire. They ate in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The storm outside grew wilder, shaking the door, rattling the chinks between the logs. Caleb rose and reinforced the latch with a wooden beam. "Wind like that can tear roofs off if it wants," he said. Eliza looked up at him. "You sound like a man who's seen his share of bad weather." He gave a faint, crooked grin. "Ain't a man worth much till he's had to dig himself out of a blizzard or two. Lost a horse once to the cold up near Fort Benton. Walked 6 miles in snow to my knees to find shelter. Learned real quick that pride don't keep you warm." That last line lingered between them. Eliza lowered her eyes to the firelight. "I reckon I've been keeping company with pride myself. It's quieter than people most days." He chuckled softly. Quieter but colder. When the laughter faded, the silence returned, but this time it felt different. Warmer, like a shared understanding had formed in the flicker of the flames. Eliza stared into the fire, her voice barely a whisper. "Back home they called me stubborn. Said no man would want a woman who worked with her hands and spoke her mind. Said I should have stayed where I belonged." "Where's that?" She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Behind someone else's shadow." Caleb studied her for a long moment. The firelight reflected in his eyes, soft and steady. "Sounds to me like you belong wherever you decide to stand." The words hit her harder than she expected. For years she'd built her life around proving people wrong, but no one had ever said she simply belonged. After a while, she rose to refill his cup with what passed for coffee. Her hand trembled slightly from exhaustion and she nearly spilled it. Caleb reached out instinctively, steadying the tin mug. His fingers brushed hers again, rough and warm. "Eliza," he said quietly, "you don't have to do everything alone." Her throat tightened. "It's the only way I've learned to survive." He didn't argue. He just nodded as though he understood. For a long stretch, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the low moan of the storm. Shadows moved across their faces, flickering like thoughts they were too cautious to voice. Then, unthinking, she murmured, "I'm not pretty, Mr. Boone." Caleb didn't flinch, didn't look startled, didn't rush to disagree like most men might. He only looked at her steadily, his expression unreadable but kind. That's fine, he said finally. I need honest, not fancy. The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her, something she hadn't realized was starving for truth. Eliza turned away quickly, blinking hard at the flames. You sure don't waste time with sweet talk, do you? He gave a low chuckle. Sweet talk melts quick as snow. Truth sticks. Outside, the wind screamed through the valley. Inside, warmth bloomed slow and fragile, built not from romance but from recognition. For the first time in a long time, Eliza didn't feel invisible. She sat quietly as the storm raged, feeling something in her heart begin to thaw, something she didn't yet have the courage to name. And when she finally drifted to sleep by the fire, Caleb Boone sat watch a while longer, eyes on the door, listening to the storm die down. He'd seen many shelters on his long travels, but this half-built cabin, felt like the first place that had asked him to stay. When morning finally came, the world outside had turned to white silence. Snow blanketed everything, the trees, the fence posts, even the mule's back. The storm had passed, but its memory lay thick and heavy over the land. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Eliza stirred first, her body stiff from sleeping in the chair near the hearth. The smell of smoke clung to her clothes. She blinked against the pale light that filtered through the frosted window. Caleb was already up. She heard him moving outside, the muffled thud of boots on snow, the scrape of wood being dragged. Curious, she pulled on her shawl and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, biting her cheeks pink. There he was, standing bareheaded in the sharp morning light, an axe in hand. He was splitting logs with an ease that made the work look effortless, each swing clean, powerful, precise. You don't have to do that, she called over the wind. He looked up, the corner of his mouth tugging in a faint smile. You needed firewood, didn't you? Can't build much with frozen fingers. Eliza leaned against the doorframe, watching him a moment longer. You plan on fixing the rest of my cabin too, Mr. Boone? He set the axe head down in the snow and straightened, his breath puffing in white clouds. You could use another pair of hands. I could use a place to ride out the rest of winter. Sounds like a fair trade to me. Her brows rose. A deal then? A deal, he said simply. She studied him, trying to read the kind of man who made offers without expecting payment beyond fair share. In her experience, help always came with strings attached. But there was something about Caleb Boone's manner that felt solid, like oak. He didn't talk more than necessary. Didn't boast. He just did what needed doing. Fine, she said after a pause. You help me finish the cabin. I'll feed you till spring. Fair, he replied. He bent to pick up another log, and that was that, their partnership sealed not by handshake but by quiet understanding. Through the next days they worked side by side. The rhythm of labor became its own language, hammer blows, sawdust, the scent of fresh-cut pine thick in the air. Eliza was surprised by how easily they fell into pace. Caleb didn't hover or take over. He let her work, offering a steady hand only when needed. When she struggled to lift a beam into place, he simply stepped in, bracing the weight with one arm while she fastened the joints. Strong woman, he murmured approvingly once as she wiped sweat from her brow despite the cold. Necessity makes you strong, she said. He smiled. No ma'am. Strength comes first. Necessity just finds it. It wasn't charm, just truth, plain and clear. And somehow that was worth more than any polished word she'd ever heard from men before. By late afternoon the roof was half mended. Caleb climbed the frame like he'd done it his whole life. Eliza stood below, handing him nails and boards. The sunlight caught on his hair and the line of his jaw. She didn't notice she was watching him until he looked down and caught her gaze. What? He asked, grinning faintly. She turned away fast. You're gonna fall if you keep talking. He laughed softly, a sound she realized she liked. When dusk fell they returned inside, both weary and silent. Eliza stirred up stew from dried venison and the last of her root vegetables. They ate by the fire, shoulders nearly touching but neither breaking the comfort of the quiet. After a while Caleb spoke. You ever think about going back east? Eliza shook her head. Nothing for me there. Folks talk behind your back if you don't fit their picture of a woman. What picture is that? She smiled faintly. Soft hands, pretty dresses, quiet tongue. He gave a low chuckle. Never cared for that kind myself. Can't trust someone who's scared to get dirt under their nails. Eliza looked up sharply, but his face was calm, honest. She didn't know what to make of him. This man who worked like an ox and spoke like he'd already made peace with the world's cruelties. She asked softly, And what about you, Mr. Boone? What are you running from? His eyes met hers and for a heartbeat the firelight caught something deep, Sadness, maybe, or loss. Not runnin', he said. Just wanderin'. Sometimes the road feels easier than stayin' put. Sounds lonely. He stirred his coffee. Sometimes it is. Eliza's chest tightened. I know what that feels like. They didn't speak after that. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable, like both were learning the shape of each other's quiet. Later, as she banked the fire for the night, Caleb spoke softly, almost to himself. Funny thing about building, he said. You start thinking, it's just about walls and a roof. Turns out, you're really building a life you didn't know you wanted. Eliza paused, looking at him in the dim light. He wasn't smiling now, but there was peace in his voice, something she hadn't heard from him before. And though she didn't say it aloud, she realized he was right. Each board, each nail, each shared silence, it was building something neither had planned for. Something beginning to feel like belonging. The first sign came with the silence. Winter nights in the Montana highlands were never quiet. Wind moaned through the pines, the river cracked beneath its frozen skin, and the cabin creaked like an old man's bones. But that night the noise stopped. The forest went still. Even the mule tethered near the barn fell uneasy, stamping the snow and blowing clouds of breath into the moonlight. Eliza was mending a tear in her coat by the hearth, while Caleb was sharpening his knife by the fire. The blade sang softly against the whetstone. Then he stopped mid-motion. His head tilted toward the window. You hear that? He asked. She set her needle down, frowning. Hear what? He didn't answer. He rose slowly, moving to the door. When he cracked it open, the cold bit at them both. The world outside was painted in pale silver light, snow, trees, and stillness. Then came the sound. A long low howl. Followed by another. Then several, circling from the ridge above. Her breath caught. Wolves. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Close too. He closed the door and reached for his rifle. They're hungry. Storms like the last one drive the game off the hills. They'll go after anything that moves. Eliza's heart thudded. They took my mule once, she whispered. Last winter. I found what was left of her by the creek. Caleb checked his rifle and handed her another, her brother's old Winchester, oiled but dusty. Then they already know this place, he said. Let's make sure they don't forget who owns it now. They stepped outside, boots crunching on frozen snow. The moon hung heavy and white above the pines. Every shadow seemed alive. The first wolf showed itself near the edge of the tree line, a gray ghost with yellow eyes. Then another, slinking low. 6, maybe 7 in total. Their breath steamed in the cold, tails low, bodies weaving in and out of the moonlight like smoke. Eliza swallowed hard, steadying the rifle. Caleb crouched beside her near the fence, calm and unreadable. Don't shoot till they come close, he murmured. Let 'em show what they mean to do. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She tried to remember her brother's lessons. Breathe slow, aim true. But when one wolf broke from the pack and crept closer, her nerves wavered. Caleb's hand brushed hers briefly, steady, reassuring. You've got this, he whispered. When the wolf lunged, Eliza fired. The sound split the night like thunder. The animal dropped, snow scattering around it. The rest of the pack paused, snarling and pacing before melting back into the shadows. Silence again. Then Caleb fired once, clean and sure. Another wolf fell. The others retreated, whining, dragging their wounded away into the timber. Within moments, the night swallowed them whole. For several long seconds, neither moved. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the pine and frost. Eliza exhaled shakily, lowering the rifle. Is it over? For now, Caleb said, scanning the tree line. They'll keep their distance. Wolves respect what bites back. He turned toward her then, and the moonlight caught her face, eyes wide, cheeks flushed from the cold and adrenaline. You did good, he said softly. Real good. She tried to laugh, but it came out weak. My hands are still shaking. He reached out, covering her hands with his gloved ones. That's all right. Courage ain't never been about not shaking. For a moment they stood there, two figures alone in a vast wilderness, breath mingling in the cold. Eliza's fear began to fade, replaced by something steadier, warmer. Inside, she stoked the fire higher, the crackle and heat a comfort against the night. Caleb cleaned the rifles without a word, his movements slow and deliberate. When he caught her watching him, he said quietly, You remind me of someone. Who? My mother, he said. She was tough as boot leather. Folks said she wasn't pretty either. But my father used to say she was made of the kind of beauty that lasts, kind you can build a life on. Eliza looked away, blinking hard. Not many men think that way. He shrugged. Not many men been through enough winters to know what matters. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening in the firelight. Thank you, for helping me. You don't owe me thanks, he said. Just keep standing your ground. That's all. That night, neither slept much. Caleb stayed near the door, rifle within reach, eyes on the dark beyond the window. Eliza lay on her cot, listening to the fire crackle and his quiet breathing nearby. The storm outside had passed, but the one within her heart had only begun to stir. Somehow she felt safer than she had in years, not because the wolves were gone, but because someone had finally stood beside her when they came. The weeks that followed the wolf attack carried a quiet rhythm, the kind that settles over a place when two souls have learned to work in harmony. Winter still held the land in its grip, but the days were growing longer. The river, once sealed in white, began to murmur again beneath its crust of ice. When Eliza stepped out each morning, she could smell the faintest hint of thaw in the wind, wet earth and pine sap returning to life. The cabin had changed. What had once been a crooked shelter was now sturdy and straight, its walls sealed, its roof tight. Smoke rose steady from the chimney, a sign of survival. And inside the air had changed too. Where there had been silence, now there was talk, low and sparse but comfortable. Caleb would tell her small things: how to tell a horse's temperament by its eyes, how to stack logs so they wouldn't warp, how the mountains turned gold in the summer when the wild grass bloomed. In turn, she told him stories she hadn't shared with anyone, of her father's farm in Kansas, of her brother's laugh, of the fiancé who had promised her forever and left her with a letter. He never pitied her. Never offered words he didn't mean. Just listened, steady as a stone. And somehow that was enough. One gray morning, Caleb saddled his horse. "I'll ride into town," he said, pulling on his gloves. "We're running low on flour and kerosene. Anything else you need?" Eliza thought for a moment. "Thread. Maybe sugar if it's not too dear." He nodded. "Won't be gone more'n 2 days, weather holdin'." She watched him ride off through the pines, a dark shape fading into the white distance. The sound of hooves lingered long after he'd gone. The cabin felt emptier than it should have. That night the wind came down cold again. Eliza sat by the fire mending clothes, staring too long at the empty chair across from her. She didn't like how much she missed his voice. He returned late the next afternoon, his horse crusted with frost, his face windburned but smiling. "Town's a mess," he said, setting down the sacks of supplies. "Drunks, gossip, mud up to your knees, but they had sugar and I got you 2 spools of thread for good measure." Her eyes lit with something small but genuine. "You're spoilin' me now." He grinned faintly. "You've earned it." Then his expression sobered as he pulled an envelope from his coat. "Postmaster said this was waiting for you. Came a while back, just hadn't been claimed." Eliza froze. Her name was scrawled across the front in a hand she hadn't seen in a year. Her stomach twisted. Caleb must have seen the change in her face because he said quietly, "You want me to leave you to it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. You can stay." He stepped back respectfully while she broke the seal. The paper trembled in her hands as she read. Asterisk. "Eliza, I hope this finds you well. I heard about your brother. I'm sorry for what happened. Life has taken a turn here. I'm married now, to a good woman, one suited to town life. I wish you peace and happiness in whatever you've chosen to make of yourself." Asterisk. That was all. No apology. No remorse. Just tidy words from a man who'd already forgotten her. She stared at the page until the firelight blurred it. Then she folded it once and dropped it into the flames. It caught quickly, curling into ash. Caleb didn't speak. He only watched, his face unreadable. When the last edge blackened and turned to cinder, she said quietly, "Guess that's that." He finally spoke. "You're better off without that kind of man." Her throat tightened. "You don't even know what kind of woman I am." He looked at her, steady and certain. "Yeah, I do. You're the kind that keeps swinging the hammer even when her hands bleed." The word struck something deep inside her. All the pain, the shame, the buried anger, years of being told she wasn't enough, all melted beneath that simple truth. She met his gaze, eyes glistening. "You shouldn't say things you don't mean." "I don't say anything I don't mean," he said softly. The air between them felt charged, fragile. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. She turned away before he could see the tears slip down her cheek. "You must think I'm foolish, burnin' letters like some heartbroken girl." He shook his head. "I think you're human. Nothin' foolish about that." For a long moment neither spoke. Outside, the sun sank behind the ridge, turning the snow pink and gold. Finally Eliza sighed. Maybe he did me a favor. Caleb smiled faintly. I'd say he surely did. His kind of man don't deserve your kind of woman. Her eyes lifted to meet his again, and for the first time she didn't look away. In that quiet, something unspoken passed between them. Not a confession. Not yet. But an understanding steady as the land beneath their boots. That night, after he'd banked the fire and the cabin fell still, Eliza found herself whispering into the dark. Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. And in his cot across the room, Caleb Boone, half awake, eyes open to the flicker of dying firelight, heard her voice and smiled faintly. Because somewhere deep down he'd been waiting to hear her say it. By March the snow began to soften around the edges. The long white silence of winter gave way to sound again. The dripping of meltwater from the eaves, the crack of ice breaking loose from the creek, the distant caw of returning crows. The air smelled different now, damp earth, pine sap and smoke. Inside the cabin, Eliza peeled back the shutters and let sunlight in for the first time in months. It struck the floorboards like gold dust, making everything feel new again. World's waking up, Caleb said, setting his hat on the table. She smiled faintly. Seems it survived the winter better than we did. He chuckled low in his chest. Speak for yourself, Miss Eliza. I seen you stare down storms tougher than most men could handle. Her cheeks warmed. Don't start flatterin' me, Boone. I'll get suspicious. Not flatterin', he said, tightening a strap on his pack. Just tellin' it plain. That was how Caleb spoke, plain. Honest. No fancy words. But it was that very simplicity that had started to mean something to her. As the snow thinned, the world outside demanded work. The fence had to be repaired. The stores restocked. The barn roof patched where the wind had ripped shingles loose. They worked side by side through long days. Caleb with his steady hands, Eliza with her quiet focus. Sometimes they talked. More often they didn't need to. There were small moments. Her laughter when he nearly fell into the thawing creek, his quiet glance when she hummed while sweeping the porch. Neither would call it love yet, but something was building, slow as spring itself. Then one morning, Caleb came back from the barn with a letter of his own in hand. Post rider from town passed through, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Left this for me. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron. Good news, I hope? He unfolded it, scanning the page with eyes that didn't give much away. It's from a rancher I knew down near Santa Fe, he said slowly. He's offerin' me a foreman's job. Good pay. Warm weather. More stock than I could count. She looked up sharply. You thinkin' of goin'? He hesitated. Wouldn't be right to turn down a good offer. Work's hard to come by and a man's got to earn his keep. Her voice was steady but her heart sank. Course he does. For the first time in months the cabin felt cold again. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the wind scrape across the roof, thinking about all they'd built. The cabin, the trust, the quiet companionship. The thought of him leaving felt like tearing the roof off just as spring came. By dawn she'd made up her mind. She found him outside loading gear onto his horse. You leavin' today? She asked, her voice low. He paused, his hand on the saddle strap. Figure I oughta. Before I start talking myself out of it. Then don't, she said suddenly. He turned to her, brows furrowed. Don't talk yourself out of it, she said again, softer now. If you've got somewhere you belong, you should go. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You think I belong there? She swallowed hard. I don't know where you belong, Caleb Boone. But I know what kind of man you are. You help people. You build things. Maybe that's all this place was to you, something to fix before moving on. His expression changed, a mix of hurt and something deeper. You think that's all you were to me? Just work. She didn't answer right away. The lump in her throat made it hard. He stepped closer, his voice rough. I came here thinking I was helpin' some lost woman who didn't know which way the world turned. Truth is, you're the one who steadied me. You gave me a reason to stay put for once. Her breath caught. Then why are you leavin'? Because I don't know if you'd want me to stay, he said. And I ain't the kind to wear out my welcome. She stared at him, heart pounding. Then she whispered, you wouldn't be wearing out anything. The air went still between them, just the drip of melting snow from the eaves, the soft snort of his horse. Caleb took off his hat, turning it in his hands. You sure about that? She nodded once, eyes glistening. I ain't fancy, Caleb. You know that. But I'm honest, and honest says, I don't want this place without you in it. He let out a slow breath as if something inside him finally eased. I ain't fancy either, he said, voice low. But I reckon I need honest more than anything. They stood there, inches apart, the early light spilling over them. Two souls who'd spent a lifetime being half seen finally seeing each other whole. He set his hat down on the porch rail and reached out, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "Guess I'll stay a while longer," he murmured. Her smile trembled. "Guess you'd better." And for the first time the cabin didn't just feel like shelter. It felt like home. By late April, the last snow melted off the ridge, leaving behind dark, fertile earth and the soft rush of new streams carving through the valley. Grass pushed through the mud, stubborn and green. The pines shed their frost like old memories. The world was alive again. And so were they. Eliza stood outside one morning, her hands dusted with flour from baking. The sun climbed over the horizon, painting the cabin golden. She breathed deep, wood smoke, damp soil, and the faint sweetness of wild sage carried on the wind. Inside, Caleb was fixing a new hinge on the door, whistling low. The sound made her smile. It had been a long time since laughter or music felt at home in her life. When he caught her watching, he said with a grin, "You keep staring at me like that, I'll start thinking I'm something to look at." She laughed softly. "You're something to listen to, that's for sure." "Now that's dangerous talk," he said, setting the hinge straight. "A man could get used to hearing that every day." She tilted her head. "Then maybe he ought to." The words hung between them, simple, unadorned, true. That spring they built the garden together. Caleb broke the ground, his muscles straining against the plow while Eliza followed with seed and care. The soil was rich, fed by snowmelt and ash from their winter fires. Every evening they sat on the porch as the world darkened, watching the first green shoots appear. Eliza would sometimes hum and Caleb would close his eyes, listening like a man who'd never known peace until that sound. One afternoon, while mending the fence by the creek, a rider from town appeared, a dusty man with a telegram folded in his pocket. "Mr. Boone?" the rider called. "Message for you." Caleb wiped his hands and opened it. It was from the rancher in Santa Fe, the same man who'd offered him work. Position still open. Good pay. No family obligations required. He read it once, then folded it slowly. Eliza waited, her stomach tight. "You think you'll go?" He looked up at her, eyes steady. "No. Got my work right here." She tried to hide her relief, but he saw it anyway. He reached out and brushed a bit of dirt from her sleeve. "Besides," he added quietly, "you're a harder boss than any rancher I've met." She laughed through the tears threatening her eyes. "That's so." He nodded. "You don't let a man quit when the world gets cold. You make him stay and build something worth keeping." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just a cowboy but the man who had rebuilt her hope, one honest word at a time. That night, under a sky full of stars, they sat together on the porch, the spring breeze warm on their skin. Eliza spoke first. "You ever think about the folks in town? What they'd say if they saw us?" He chuckled. "They'd say I lost my mind. Or maybe that I finally found something worth losing it for." She smiled softly. "They'd laugh at me same as before. Say I was plain rough-handed, nothing special." Caleb leaned back, eyes glinting in the starlight. "Let 'em laugh. Fancy don't keep a man warm at night. Honesty does." She turned to him. "And you really don't care that I'm not?" He cut her off, his voice low and certain. "Pretty? You're better than that, Eliza. You're real. And that's what I've been looking for my whole damn life." Her throat tightened and before she could speak, he reached for her hand, rough, calloused, strong. "You and me," he said. "We built this place with our bare hands. Seems only right we keep building, together." Her fingers closed around his, firm and sure. "Then let's do it." When morning came, the cabin glowed in the sunlight. The smoke from their chimney curled lazily into the blue sky, the garden sprouted with promise, and two figures worked side by side, laughter mingling with the song of the creek. They had survived the cold, the loneliness, and the judgments of the world. What they built now, this quiet, honest love, would last far longer than spring. And when Eliza looked over at him, dirt on his hands, smile easy and sure, she whispered under her breath, "I'm not pretty." Caleb looked up from his work and answered, "That's fine. I don't need pretty. I need you." The wind carried their laughter across the open land, through the valley that once held only silence. And for the first time the frontier didn't feel lonely anymore.